It was one of those September mornings that makes you feel alive. You know the kind. When the air is so crisp it almost hurts to breathe, but in a good way. When the sky is that impossible shade of blue that doesn't seem real. That's exactly how it felt when David stepped out of his car at the trailhead. He'd been planning this hike for weeks. Life had been crazy lately. Work was piling up, deadlines were crushing him, and he just needed to get away. Just him and the mountains. No emails, no phone calls, no stress. Just peace. David had done this trail before. Twice, actually. It was a pretty easy route, about 6 miles round trip. Nothing too challenging. He knew it well enough that he didn't even bother checking the trail map at the parking lot. Why would he? He'd walked this path before. His backpack was light. Maybe too light, looking back on it now. He had 2 water bottles, a handful of granola bars, his phone, and a light jacket tied around his waist. That was it. After all, he'd be back by late afternoon. No need to carry a bunch of extra stuff for a simple day hike. The first hour was absolutely perfect. Golden aspen trees lined the trail, their leaves shimmering in the breeze like thousands of tiny coins. The sound of his boots on the dirt path was rhythmic and calming. Every few minutes, he'd stop to catch his breath and take in the view. Mountains stretched out in every direction, their peaks still holding onto patches of snow from last winter. He passed a couple of other hikers heading down. They smiled and nodded. One of them had a dog, a happy golden retriever that wagged its tail as it trotted past. Everything felt right with the world. Around noon, David reached a fork in the trail he didn't quite remember. There was the main path, the one he'd taken before. But there was also another trail, less worn but still visible, heading off to the right. He'd heard other hikers talking about this shortcut before. They said it took you to the same place, but cut off almost a mile and had even better views. He stood there for a moment, thinking. The sky was still clear. He felt good. He had plenty of time. Why not try something different? That decision, made in about 30 seconds, changed everything. The shortcut started off fine. The trail was narrower but easy enough to follow. The views really were better up here. He could see valleys he hadn't seen from the main trail. He even stopped to take a few photos with his phone. But after about 20 minutes, something felt off. The trail markers, those little wooden posts with painted symbols, had stopped appearing. David looked around. The path was getting fainter, less defined. He kept walking, figuring it would become clearer ahead. Did and single quotes T. After another 10 minutes. He stopped. The trail had basically disappeared. He was just walking through forest now, no clear path in any direction. Okay, he thought, no problem. I'll just backtrack. He turned around and started walking back the way he came. Or at least, the way he thought he came. But nothing looked familiar. Had he passed that fallen tree before? Was that the same rock formation? The forest all looked the same now. Every direction just showed more trees, more rocks, more shadows. David pulled out his phone. No signal, not even one bar. He held it up high, walked to a clearing. Tried again. Nothing. The battery was at 60%, but without a signal. It was just a useless piece of metal and glass. A small knot of worry started forming in his stomach. He wasn't panicking yet, but he was definitely concerned. He picked a direction that felt right and started walking with more purpose. He walked for 30 minutes, then an hour. Nothing looked right. No trail markers, no familiar landmarks, just endless forest. He checked his phone again. Still no signal. The battery was at 45% now. He turned it off to save power. The sun was lower in the sky now. He'd been walking for hours, and he had no idea where he was. The realization hit him like cold water. He was lost. Actually, truly lost in the mountains. David sat down on a rock and forced himself to breathe slowly. Think, he told himself. What do you do when you're lost? He'd seen shows about this, read articles, but his mind was racing, and it was hard to remember clearly. Stay calm. That was the first thing. Don't panic. He wasn't hurt. He had some water and food. He just needed to figure this out. He looked at the sky. Clouds were starting to roll in from the west, dark and heavy. The temperature was dropping too. His light jacket suddenly didn't seem like enough. He dressed for a warm afternoon hike, not for spending the night outside. The thought made his stomach drop. Spending the night outside? No, he'd find his way back. He had to. But as he looked around at the darkening forest, at the identical trees stretching in every direction, at the clouds blocking out more and more of the sky, doubt crept in. What if he didn't find his way back today? He thought about his roommate, Kyle. David had told him he'd be back by dinner. Kyle wouldn't worry until maybe 9 or 10 tonight. And even then, Kyle might just assume David had stopped somewhere to eat or had stayed out later than planned. It could be tomorrow morning before anyone realized something was wrong. The first drops of rain started falling. Cold, heavy drops that soaked through his shirt quickly. David looked around frantically for shelter. There, about 50 yards away, was a rocky overhang. Not much, but better than nothing. He jogged over to it, his boots slipping on wet leaves. The overhang created a small dry space, maybe 6 feet deep and 4 feet high. He had to crouch to fit under it, but at least he was out of the rain. He sat there, hugging his knees, listening to the rain pound the ground outside his little shelter. The temperature kept dropping. He could see his breath now. His thin jacket was already soaked through. This was really happening. He was lost in the mountains. A storm was rolling in. Night was coming. And nobody knew where he was. For the first time, David felt real fear. The rain came down harder. David watched from his rocky shelter as daylight faded and the forest turned into a wall of darkness. He'd never experienced darkness like this before. In the city, there were always lights, street lights, car headlights, the glow from windows. Out here, there was nothing, just pure, complete blackness. He turned on his phone for light. The screen said 6:47 p.m. and the battery was at 40%. He turned it back off immediately. He needed to save every bit of power he had. The cold was getting worse. His teeth started chattering. Not just a little shiver, but violent, uncontrollable shaking that made his whole body ache. He'd heard about hypothermia before, but never really thought about what it meant. Now he was starting to understand. He needed to stay warm somehow. David crawled out into the rain, instantly getting soaked again, and started gathering anything he could find: pine needles, leaves, small branches. He piled them under the overhang, creating a sort of nest. Then he buried himself in it, packing the vegetation around his body like insulation. It helped, a little. The shaking slowed down, though it never completely stopped. But now he had a new problem. Every time he started to drift off to sleep, a sound would jolt him awake. A crack of a branch, a rustle in the bushes, an animal cry in the distance. Bears lived in these mountains, mountain lions too. He'd seen the warning signs at the trailhead, the ones he barely glanced at because he was on a well-traveled trail in the middle of the day. But now, in the darkness, those warnings felt very real. Was that breathing he heard? Was something watching him? His imagination turned every shadow into a threat, every sound into approaching danger. His heart would race, adrenaline flooding his system. And then, nothing. Just the rain and the wind and the cold. The night stretched on forever. Minutes felt like hours. David would think surely it must be almost dawn, only to check his phone and see it was only 9 p.m. Then 10 p.m. Then 11 p.m. Each time he checked, his battery dropped another few percent. At 30% battery, he forced himself to stop checking. He needed that phone to last. His mind wouldn't shut off. He kept replaying his decisions. Why had he taken that shortcut? Why hadn't he brought better supplies? Why hadn't he told Kyle exactly which trail he was taking? Every mistake felt huge now, potentially life-threatening. He thought about his family, his mom, who worried about him constantly anyway, his younger brother, who looked up to him. What would they think when they heard he'd gotten lost on a simple day hike? Would they think he was stupid, careless? The thought spiraled. What if they never found him? What if he became one of those stories? A missing hiker whose body is discovered years later by accident. He'd always thought those stories were about inexperienced people, tourists who didn't know what they were doing. He'd never imagined he could become one of them. Around what he guessed was midnight. Though he refused to check his phone, something changed. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The clouds parted slightly, and he could see stars. Just a few at first, then more and more. The sight of them calmed him somehow. They were the same stars people could see from the city. The same stars his family might be looking at right now. He wasn't completely cut off from the world. The temperature dropped even more without the cloud cover. David curled into a tighter ball, pulling his pile of leaves and pine needles closer. His stomach growled loudly. He'd eaten one granola bar hours ago. He had 3 left. How long did he need to make them last? Don't think about that now, he told himself. Just survive tonight. Figure out tomorrow when tomorrow comes. But sleep wouldn't come. He was too cold, too uncomfortable, too scared every time his eyes closed. His body would jerk him awake, as if some primal part of his brain knew that falling asleep in this cold could be dangerous. So he stayed awake, watching the stars slowly move across the sky, counting his breaths, wiggling his toes and fingers to make sure they still worked. The cold made everything hurt. His joints ached, his muscles were stiff, his skin felt like ice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the darkness started to fade. Not sunrise yet, but that pre-dawn grayness that meant morning was coming. David had never been so happy to see daylight approaching in his entire life. He made it through. The first night, he was still alive, cold, exhausted, hungry, and scared, but alive. As the forest slowly became visible again, David made himself a promise. He wasn't going to die out here. He made mistakes, yes, but he was going to fix them. He was going to survive this. The question was how the morning light revealed how bad things really were. David's clothes were still damp from the rain. His lips were cracked and dry despite the humidity. His whole body ached from spending the night curled up on the ground. But he was alive, and that meant he had a chance. He crawled out from under his overhang and stood up slowly. His legs were stiff, his muscles protesting every movement. He ate one granola bar, chewing slowly to make it last, to make it feel like more food than it was. 2 bars left now. Think, he told himself. What's the plan? He couldn't just wander randomly through the forest. That's probably what he'd been doing yesterday, and look where it got him. He needed to be smart about this. He remembered something from a survival show he'd watched once. If you're lost, stay in one place. Make yourself visible. Search teams will be looking for you, and it's easier for them to find you if you're not constantly moving, okay? So he needed to stay put and create a signal, something that could be seen from the air. David started looking around. He was in a small valley, surrounded by tall pine trees. The canopy was thick overhead. A helicopter could fly right over and never see him. He needed to find a clearing. He followed the sound of water. There, about 100 yards from his shelter, was a small stream, and next to the stream was an opening in the trees, maybe 20 feet across. Perfect. For the next hour, David worked harder than he'd ever worked. He gathered rocks from the stream, big ones that he could barely carry. His back screamed in protest, but he kept going. One by one, he arranged them in the clearing to spell out HELP. Each letter was about 10 feet tall. When he finished, he stood back and looked at his work. From the ground, it looked impressive, but would it be visible from the air? He hoped so. He had to hope so. He took off his red jacket, the only bright piece of clothing he had, and tied it to a tall branch at the edge of the clearing. It hung there like a flag, moving slightly in the breeze. The stream meant water. He was thirsty, incredibly thirsty. His 2 water bottles were empty now. He knew drinking from streams could make you sick, that there were parasites and bacteria, but dehydration would kill him faster than any parasite. He drank deeply, the cold water almost painful as it went down his throat. Then he waited. He gathered more firewood and piled it near his shelter. He checked his phone. 25% battery. Still no signal. He turned it off again. The sun climbed higher. It was actually a beautiful day, warm and clear, under different circumstances. He would have loved it. Now, every hour that passed felt like torture. Where were the search teams? Were they even looking for him yet? Around what he guessed was early afternoon, he heard it, a distant thump, thump, thump sound. His heart leaped. A helicopter. David ran to his clearing, waving his arms frantically. The sound got louder. There, he could see it, flying low over the mountains. It was coming his direction. He jumped up and down, screaming at the top of his lungs even though he knew they couldn't hear him. The helicopter got closer, closer. It was maybe a quarter-mile away now. His throat was raw from shouting, his arms tired from waving. But he didn't stop. The helicopter passed directly overhead. David could see people inside, could see the search and rescue markings on its side. He waved even harder, his entire body screaming for their attention, and it kept going. The sound got quieter. The helicopter disappeared over the next ridge. They hadn't seen him. The trees were too thick, or his signal wasn't big enough, or they just weren't looking in the right spot. David stood there in his clearing, his arms slowly dropping to his sides, watching the empty sky. The silence after the helicopter disappeared was crushing. That had been his best chance. Maybe his only chance, and it had failed. He walked back to his shelter and sat down. For a long moment, he just stared at nothing. Then, for the first time since this whole thing started, he cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. It wasn't fair. He'd done everything right. He made a signal, stayed put, tried so hard, and it hadn't mattered. He thought about his mom and how she'd always told him to be careful. He thought about Kyle, who was probably worried sick by now. He thought about all the things he'd never get to do, never get to say. But then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the last bit of his survival instinct kicking in. But the sadness turned to anger. No, he wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to sit here feeling sorry for himself until he died. David wiped his face and forced himself to think clearly. Okay, the helicopter didn't see him, so waiting here might not work. What else could he do? He thought back to every survival story he'd ever heard. Water flows downhill. Rivers lead to civilization. People build things near water. The stream. He should follow the stream. It would eventually lead somewhere, wouldn't it? It was a risk. He'd be leaving his signal behind, making it harder for search. The stream led David through terrain that got rougher with each step. The gentle forest walk turned into scrambling over rocks, pushing through thick bushes, climbing over fallen trees. His legs burned with exhaustion. His empty stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside. He'd been following the water for hours now. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows through the trees. He needed to find shelter before dark. The thought of another night out here made him want to cry again, but he pushed the feeling down. One thing at a time. Just keep moving. The stream got wider, flowing faster. That was good, right? That meant he was heading downhill, getting lower. Lower meant closer to civilization. It had to. David stepped onto what looked like solid ground near the stream bank. The rock beneath his foot gave way. In a split second, he was falling, tumbling down a steep embankment. He tried to grab onto something, anything, but his hands just scraped against dirt and stone. He hit the bottom hard, his body slamming into the ground. Pain exploded through his left ankle, sharp and intense. He lay there for a moment, stunned, trying to catch his breath. When he tried to stand up, his ankle screamed in protest. He looked down at it. Already it was swelling, pushing against his boot. He tried to put weight on it. His leg nearly buckled, and fresh waves of pain shot up his calf. No, 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 no. This couldn't be happening. David sat back down, trying not to panic. He was hurt, really hurt. His ankle might be sprained. It might be broken. Either way, walking was going to be nearly impossible. He wanted to scream. He wanted to punch something. Instead, he took several deep breaths and forced himself to think. This wasn't over. People survived worse than this. He just needed to stay calm and figure it out. First things first. He needed to take care of his ankle. He carefully unlaced his boot, his hands shaking partly from pain and partly from fear. The swelling was bad, the skin already turning purple. He knew he should probably leave the boot on to support it, but the pressure was too much. Using his jacket, he wrapped his ankle as tightly as he could stand. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then he looked around for something to use as a crutch. There, a fallen branch that looked sturdy enough. He tested it. It would work. Getting up was agony. Actually moving forward was worse. Each step sent jolts of pain through his leg, but he gritted his teeth and kept going. What choice did he have? He couldn't stay here. He had to keep following the stream. His progress slowed to a crawl. What had taken him minutes before now took 20 minutes, 30 minutes. The sun was almost at the horizon now. He was running out of time to find shelter. David's mind started playing tricks on him. The exhaustion, the pain, the hunger all combined into a foggy confusion. Sometimes he'd stop and forget why he'd stopped. Sometimes he'd see things that weren't there, shapes moving in the shadows. He pulled out his last granola bar and ate it mechanically. It barely touched his hunger, but it was something. He scooped water from the stream and drank. The physical act of eating and drinking helped clear his head a little. As darkness started to fall on his third night lost in the wilderness, David found himself in a terrifying position. He was injured, exhausted, out of food, and miles from anywhere. His phone was dead now, completely drained. Not that it mattered since there was no signal anyway, but somehow having that dead phone made him feel even more alone. He found a relatively flat area near the stream and collapsed. He couldn't go any further tonight. His ankle was twice its normal size now. Every part of his body hurt. He was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. But he was also shivering so hard from the cold that sleeping seemed impossible. This is how it ends, he thought. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly. He'd just get weaker and weaker until he couldn't move anymore. They'd find his body eventually, probably months from now. He thought about his mom and how devastated she'd be. He thought about Kyle, who would blame himself for not calling for help sooner. He thought about all the stupid little things he worried about just a week ago. Work deadlines and bills and what people thought of him, and how none of that mattered now. David closed his eyes, not sure if he'd open them again. But then he heard something. At first, he thought it was his imagination again. But no, there it was. A sound in the distance. Not a helicopter this time. Something else stopped barking. A dog was barking somewhere ahead of him. David forced his eyes open. He must be hallucinating. There were no dogs out here. But the barking continued, getting louder. His heart, which had felt so heavy and slow, suddenly started racing. Dogs meant people. People meant rescue. People meant hope. Using every bit of strength he had left, David pushed himself up. He grabbed his makeshift crutch and started hobbling toward the sound. Each step was torture, his ankle screaming at him to stop. But he didn't care. He could hear the dog getting closer now, crashing through the underbrush, and then he saw it. A medium-sized brown dog burst through the trees and stopped, looking at him. The dog barked once, twice, then turned and ran back the way it came. Wait, David tried to shout, but his voice came out as a croak. He followed as fast as his injured ankle would allow, using trees to support himself. Dragging his leg, he heard voices. Human voices. Someone was calling for the dog. David tried to shout again, managed to get out a weak call for help. The voices stopped. Then, hello? Someone there. Help. David called out, louder this time. I'm here. I need help. Through the trees came a man, older, wearing work clothes and a flannel shirt. Behind him was the brown dog, tail wagging like this was all a fun game. The man's eyes went wide when he saw David. Oh my God, you're that missing hiker. We've had search parties out for 2 days. David felt his legs give out. The man rushed forward and caught him before he hit the ground. I've got you, son. You're okay now. You're going to be okay. For the first time in 3 days, David believed it might be true. The man's name was Robert, and he owned a ranch that bordered the national park. He'd been checking his fence line with his dog, Cooper, like he did every evening. Pure chance that they'd been there at that exact moment. Pure luck that Cooper had caught David's scent and gone to investigate. David barely remembered the ride in Robert's truck. He was in and out of consciousness, his body finally allowing itself to shut down now that safety had arrived. He remembered the rough bounce of the truck on a dirt road. He remembered Robert talking on his phone, saying things like found him and in bad shape and send an ambulance to my gate. Then there were flashing lights. Paramedics asking him questions. His name, his age. Could he tell them what hurt? Everything hurt. That's all he could say. Everything. They loaded him into an ambulance. Someone put in for his arm. A warm blanket wrapped around him. The simple feeling of being warm again almost made him cry. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed him. They cut off his boot to look at his ankle. They took his temperature, his blood pressure, listened to his heart. Someone said something about hypothermia. Someone else mentioned dehydration. He heard the word lucky several times. His mom was there. He didn't know how, didn't know when she'd arrived, but suddenly she was holding his hand, crying, telling him she loved him. Kyle was there too, looking exhausted and guilty. I should have called sooner, Kyle kept saying. I should have known something was wrong. David wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but he was too tired. The words wouldn't come. Instead, he just squeezed Kyle's hand. The doctors said he'd lost 12 pounds in 72 hours. His body temperature had been dangerously low when they found him. Another night out there, they said, and it might have been too late. The hypothermia would have gotten worse. His organs might have started shutting down. His ankle was badly sprained but not broken. That was good news. They gave him pain medication and antibiotics for anything he might have picked up from drinking stream water. They kept him in the hospital for 2 days, pumping him full of fluids and warm food and monitoring his recovery. The physical healing was the easy part. His body was young and strong, and it bounced back quickly. Within a week, he could walk with crutches. Within 2 weeks, he could walk on his own, though his ankle still ached. The mental part was harder. David had nightmares almost every night. In his dreams, he was back in the forest. Sometimes he was still lost, walking forever through identical trees. Sometimes the helicopter passed overhead again and again, never seeing him. Sometimes he fell down the embankment, but in the dream, he kept falling forever. He'd wake up in his bed, safe and warm, and it would take him several minutes to convince himself it was real, that he really was home, that he really was safe. For weeks, he felt stupid. How could he have been so careless? He was experienced. He knew better. One bad decision, taking that shortcut, and he'd almost died. He put his family through hell. He'd wasted the time of dozens of search and rescue volunteers, all because he thought he knew better. David stopped hiking. The thought of going back into the wilderness made his chest tight with anxiety. His friends invited him on trips, and he'd make excuses. Too busy with work, not feeling well, his ankle still bothering him. But one day, about 4 months after his ordeal, something changed. He was watching the news, and there was a story about a hiker who'd gotten lost and died in the mountains. The person had made a lot of the same.